there, it is Erick Erickson here. The phone number 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I may live forever. I mean, I'm going to live forever. Eternity still matters. But I mean, I mean, the second coming could be 1,000 years from now, and I may live to see it. Why? The amount of coffee I drink. For years, they've told us stop drinking coffee. You know, the healthcare professionals stop drinking coffee. Now, apparently, the curation and roasting of coffee is environmentally bad, and they want you to drink less of it. But your favorite cup of coffee may actually help keep you healthy. According to, who is this? Writing at the New York Times, has seen the data. This is Jane Brody at the New York Times. The latest assessments of the health effects of coffee and caffeine, its main active ingredient, are reassuring. Their consumption has been linked to a reduced risk of all kinds of ailments, including Parkinson's disease, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, gallstones, depression, suicide, cirrhosis, liver cancer, melanoma, and prostate cancer. In fact, in numerous studies conducted throughout the world, consuming 4 or 5 8-ounce cups of coffee, about 400 milligrams of caffeine a day, has been associated with reduced death rates. In a study of more than 200,000 participants, followed for up to 30 years, those who drank 3 to 5 cups of coffee a day with or without caffeine were 15% less likely to die early from all causes than were people who shunned coffee. Perhaps more dramatic was a 50% reduction in the risk of suicide among both men and women who were moderate coffee drinkers, perhaps by boosting production of brain chemicals that had antidepressant effects. As a report published last summer by a research team at the Harvard School of Public Health concluded, although current evidence may not warrant recommending caffeine or coffee to prevent disease, for most people, drinking coffee in moderation can be part of a healthy lifestyle. Now, for years, there were warnings about it. As recently as 1991, the World Health Organization listed coffee as a possible carcinogen. In some of the now discredited studies, smoking, not coffee drinking, was responsible for the purported hazard. A lot of people who smoked had morning coffee as well, and they concluded it was the coffee. Now it turns out the coffee probably helped them. So let's go over the risk again. Consumption, and by the way, this is so 5 to 8, or 4 or 5 8-ounce cups of coffee. Now, I drink these, I got these Yeti tumblers, and I fill them up, and they're 16 ounces. So I'm getting I'm getting roughly 6 cups of coffee. Yeah, 5. I put a little milk in there too, just to cool it down. So it's about 5 cups. So I'm good. I should live forever. It includes a reduction in Parkinson's disease, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, gallstones, depression, suicide, cirrhosis, liver cancer, melanoma, and prostate cancer. Philip, if you're listening, bourbon and cigar night can continue apace. We don't have to worry, except for you, because you don't drink coffee. But me, cirrhosis and liver cancer, not with the coffee. That's right. I'm not that worried about it anyway. I had bourbon and cigar night last night. I made fried shrimp tacos. I'm going to send that recipe out, by the way. I have perfected the fried shrimp taco. I really have perfected the fried shrimp taco. I have decided. And I'm going to send out that recipe if you want it. The fried shrimp in and of themselves are fantastic, but the taco makes it extra special. Text the word recipe to 33777. Shut up, Philip. I can't say what he just relayed to me. Now, on a completely unrelated note, Delta apparently had a potential hijacking. An off-duty flight attendant was detained after an in-flight struggle. Video from the flight shows a violent confrontation involving several people wrestling a man to the floor. As someone said, get him down, keep him down. An off-duty flight attendant took control of the public address system and then fought with passengers and crew members on board a Delta Airlines flight on Friday. In the latest outburst of violent behavior by airline passengers, Delta said Flight 1730, which had been headed to Atlanta from Los Angeles, landed in Oklahoma City after an off-duty flight attendant grabbed the public address system, made an announcement about oxygen masks, setting off a struggle with passengers and crew who subdued him. Video shows the violent confrontation at the front of the plane. The aircraft landed without incident. It appears the person tried to stormed the cockpit, and then tried to open the plane as it was flying, which you can't actually, it's not possible to do. The flight attendant lost 2 teeth in the assault, according to her union. This is a flight attendant who tried to restrain the man. Just bizarre. Now, so I was flying back from New York on Saturday, and it was a jumbo jet, and the pilot insisted the flight crew block the front bathroom. So I'm in first class, and there are 3 toilets up there, but there's only one you can get to because they closed this fencing gate door, so you can't get to the other bathroom. It was very annoying, and they wouldn't let us go to the back of the plane. I know, first class. Poor me. But there's like a bunch of people in one toilet for all of us, and they wouldn't let us go use the other ones. And I suspect this potential hijacking had something to do with it. What a crazy story. All right, speaking of crime, my goodness, we got to get into crime. There's a crazy story you need to know about. Greetings, America. It is Erick Erickson. Delighted to have you from my flagship station, WSB, in Atlanta, Georgia, where it is hot, and humid. I feel like a Good Morning Vietnam comment, but I should probably not go there. It would get me in trouble and canceled. Such a good movie. All right. I have to begin with a story. Regardless of where you are, you'll be able to commiserate. This is the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So my wife and daughter, I actually live south of the city. My wife and daughter are in Atlanta this entire week. The 15-year-old decided she wanted to go to a Georgia Tech program this week. She, for years and years, I mean, since she was like 4 or 5, my kid has wanted to go to SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design, which is a ridiculously expensive private for-profit institution. And she's finally decided, both given who I am and what I do, and also her core beliefs, that she probably wouldn't fit in there, though she is a brilliant artist, very into fashion, very into art. Listen, I know people brag on their kid, but literally I saw something my kid did and thought she must have like stolen someone else's work. It was so good. It was brilliant. I couldn't believe that my kid did something like that. I just assumed she like used bits of clip art. She's like, no, did it on a tablet. It was impressive. Nonetheless, she went to the Kennedy Space Center and now she's like, I'm going to be a rocket scientist. And she's also very good at math. So she's at Georgia Tech for a program this week. And her grandfather is as happy as he can be because he's a Georgia Tech alum. And they're staying at a hotel by Georgia Tech. And I had to be very particular about where I put them because there are some places like my wife really wanted a place that had like a kitchenette, like one of those residence inn sort of places. And I was like, I don't want to put you in a place like that because yeah, you got a little kitchenette and you could go to the grocery store, but it's not a safe neighborhood. Your car is going to get broken into or you're going to get shot. Now, my wife is always packing heat, so she's not that concerned, but I am because I'm like husband and father. Crime is out of control in the city of Atlanta and everywhere else. This is from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Atlanta police have investigated 64 homicide cases in 2021, a 58% increase over this time last year. The surge follows a historically deadly 2020 when authorities investigated 157 homicide cases, the most in more than 2 decades. Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms has referred to the spike in violence as a COVID crime wave, but the city's death toll continues to mount as more Georgians get vaccinated and life returns to normal. As of June, Atlanta's murders are up and shootings have increased by 40% according to the latest data. Meanwhile, overall arrests are down by about 43% as Atlanta's police force remains more than 400 officers under its authorized level. More than 200 officers quit the force in 2020, many after criminal charges were filed against 2 involved in the deadly shooting of Rayshard Brooks and other officers who used their tasers on 2 college students during last summer's protests in downtown Atlanta. Another 75 Atlanta police officers have left since the start of the year, records show, but department leaders say morale is stabilizing and they plan to hire 250 new officers in the next fiscal year beginning July 1st. Dr. Karen Sullivan, Fulton County's chief medical examiner, said her office conducts death examinations from cities across Fulton County, but most of the homicide victims they encounter are killed in Atlanta. Anecdotally, it seems as though the complexity of the homicides is increasing. Years ago, the vast majority of homicide cases due to gunshot wounds were 1, maybe 2, rarely 3 gunshot wounds. Now it's common for people to have been shot 10 or 12 times. She said family members often have questions about how their loved ones die, including how long it took them to succumb to their injuries and whether they suffered. We feel our job is important because not only are we determining cause and manner of death, but we're able to talk to the decedent's families about what happened to them. Being able to give people some bit of closure is important to us. While any homicide is tragic, Sullivan said it can be especially difficult when the victim is someone young So many of our deaths are unnecessary. The number of killings investigated by the medical examiner's office each year rose gradually between 2017 and 2019, but there was a sharp increase starting last summer. Data show the number of homicides in the county, Fulton County, jumped from 183 in 2019 to 255 last year, an increase in nearly 40%. Keisha Lance Bottoms is now Mayor Rock Bottoms. I mean, we have hit rock bottom in the Atlanta area, but this is a national story. It's not a local story. This is happening around the country. In New York City, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is now endorsing for mayor a candidate who has doubled down on defunding the police, even as right now crime is the number one issue for voters in New York City. Crime has now taken precedence over the virus and vaccine in New York City. Around the country, this is a problem. The crime wave is a problem. For years, this country had low crime, and suddenly it is escalating. Interestingly enough, in a lot of cities, crime happens after midnight. Murders happen after midnight. These are not random shootings. Now, there are random shootings. In fact, in the city of Atlanta, I was on Fox News last week talking about this on Fox and Friends. In Atlanta, last week, you had a guy, or I guess it was 2 weeks ago now, you had a guy out jogging. Some urban youth drove through his neighborhood randomly shooting at people jogging. They were able to catch the guy. Overwhelmingly, though, the violence happens between like midnight and 5 a.m. It is gang-related in many cases. But even in places, so there's an area in Atlanta called Buckhead, and it's the rich area of the city. 41% of the city's tax revenue comes from Buckhead alone, and it wants to incorporate, some of the business leaders there want to incorporate it as their own city because the police force has collapsed because Mayor Rock Bottoms has sided with the criminals against the police. This isn't just an Atlanta story, though. I know I've got a lot of people listening and around the country, and this is happening in Minneapolis. It's happening in Los Angeles. It's happening in San Francisco. It's happening in Houston. It's happening in Dallas. It's happening in New York. It's happening in Boston. It's happening in Charlotte. It's happening in Raleigh. It's happening in Tampa. It's happening in Orlando. It's happening in Jacksonville. There is a massive crime wave in this country. Police chiefs around the country, the National Police Chiefs Association, is worried that we are going to rapidly undo all of the good done against crime in the last 20 years. As a lot of people now turn on police. There was another rioting in Minneapolis. Someone else got killed by the police in Minneapolis. And the person turned out, from what I have read, if I'm reading this right, he wasn't a great guy. Did something, ran from the police, he got killed, and yet again, the city is on fire because the Black Lives Matter protesters are out to shut them down. There's no winning for the police. I mean, just take the situation, just so you understand at a macro level what happened in Atlanta. To explain what's going on here is to understand Minneapolis and New York and everywhere else. During the George Floyd riots of last summer, there were two college students who were black who the police told to pull over. They refused to pull over. They were in downtown Atlanta, so the police tasered them in their car. The mayor of Atlanta saw the video and immediately concluded that the non-white police officers needed to be fired and punished for tasering the college students who disobeyed a direct police order to pull over and tried to drive off through the middle of a protest. And then there was the Rashard Brooks situation. An officer, Garrett Rolfe, is under indictment pending a murder trial because he shot and killed a man who beat up Rolfe's partner, gave him a concussion, stole the guy's taser, tried to run. Rolfe gave chase. The guy, Rashard Brooks, turned around and tried to shoot Garrett Rolfe with the taser, so Rolfe opened fire and killed him, as he was trained to do, and somehow Garrett Rolfe is the bad guy. He's not the bad guy. He's the police officer. And after that, the police in Atlanta up and quit, sparking a crime wave directly resulting from Mayor Rock Bottom's hitting rock bottom when it came to handling police law and order in the city. And she's trying to blame a virus when it's her own incompetence that got it there.
Eden pure.
But it's not just her. It is mayors around the country tried to coddle Black Lives Matters, a communist organization that wants to upend Western society. And they decided to side with the bad guys over the police officers who are not the bad guys. The result is crime waves across the country. But there's something more going on. And I want to talk about that when we come back. The awkward conversation you're not supposed to have in talk radio, we're going to have. Before I get there, one of the awkward moments of my life these days is waking up with a sore, scratchy throat. My son as well, and the allergies in our house, which is why we use the Eden Pure Thunderstorm air purifier, and you should too. If you're looking for an air purifier for your house, you can get some that are like the size of R2-D2. They're just giant. I've got one on my back porch. Bought it to get rid of cigar fumes, and it didn't work that great, so still can't smoke cigars on my back porch with friends. Nonetheless, the Eden Pure Thunderstorm works great. In fact, I fried shrimp in the kitchen last night, and I turned on the Eden Pure Thunderstorm because we don't have an exhaust fin in our kitchen anymore. It broke. And we finally just got rid of it. It was one of those that went down underneath the stove. Instead, I used the Eden Pure Thunderstorm. It's an air purifier that cleans up the air. It doesn't mask the odors. It gets rid of the odors. It also gets rid of the bacteria, the mold, the black mold, the mildew, the pollen. You can sleep with it in your room. You can leave it in your kitchen. You can put it in your car. It gets rid of the odors. It cleans the air, and it's filterless. Now, you can get $10 off their lowest sale price by going to EdenPureDeals.com, EdenPureDeals.com. You click on my name on the website. It says Erick Erickson, and you'll see the deal. But here's what you got to do. Put it in, go to checkout. Checkout, get your Eden Pure Thunderstorm in checkout, and you'll see a discount code box. Put my first name in, ERICK. Put that in, and you'll get $10 off the lowest sales price if you put my name in at checkout at EdenPureDeals.com. You can thank me later. It's such a great device. Came in super handy last night. My wife hates the smell of shrimp. She doesn't like shrimp at all. She's gone. But I knew she would come home a week later. She said, "You fried shrimp in here." She'll never know because I used the Eden Pure Thunderstorm.
I really do like his opinion on things.
Hello there, it is Erick Erickson here. I want to discuss the crime wave with a different angle. I'm just going to have to ask for forgiveness in advance from some of you because it'll irk some of you. Most of you will be fine with it. There is, in fact, I was talking with a friend of mine this weekend. I don't think he'll mind. It was Rush's brother David and I were talking, and we were talking about there's clearly something spiritual happening in the country. Have you noticed now, like, so the Southern Baptists are meeting, and you've got a bunch of people who will all see theologically eye to eye, fighting over who's the most conservative when they all are. And yet they've convinced themselves that some are left-wing squishes because they aren't denouncing critical race theory at all times. None of them agree with critical race theory, but yet they're squabbling over this stuff. Churches are breaking apart over it. You've got a crime rise. You have the left advancing in the streets. You have people on the right deciding, well, conservatism hasn't worked. Let's abandon it. Let's do exactly what the left does. Let's behave like the left does. Let's treat everybody on the left like people on the left treat us. Let's show no grace. There is something afoot in the country, in the world. There is now some level of spiritual warfare happening in the country in ways we haven't seen in the past. And it is striking to me that there doesn't seem to be a lot of people on the right who even recognize what's going on. But I am convinced more and more that what we are seeing in the world right now is a spiritual battle taking place. The things unseen, the battle between angels and demons, if you want to say that. We're losing grace. People aren't turning the other cheek. That is a form of weakness now. People perceive it to be a form of weakness. And yet we see it happening with crime. Families are collapsing. Churches are turning against churches. People within churches are turning against other people in churches who agree profoundly on orthodoxy, but maybe not on politics. That if you don't see eye to eye on all things, you are somehow now considered bad. You are considered a squish. You're what have you. Neighbor turning against neighbor. Parent against children, children against parent. How many people have seen the stories, the op-eds, the pieces where my neighbor supported the candidate I hate, therefore I'm not sure I can like him? And usually it's written about someone who supported Trump, or it's the kids lamenting that their parents have gone all in on support for Donald Trump, and they don't want to have a relationship with their parents anymore. They're scared of their kids going to see their parents, and politics is dividing us. Crime is dividing us. The police are now bad. The people who uphold the law are bad. Critical theory sinking into our schools. There is just the devil is on the march. I mean, there's a name for this stuff. It is satanic. And we're seeing that with these crime waves, with the increase in killings, with the people who are trying to do good are now bad. Gertrude Himmelfarb talked about how the bourgeois family is now considered deviant. Deviant is made normal. We're seeing that in society now. We're seeing the rise of persecution in this country of people of faith. There is, the things unseen are battling, and we are caught in the middle of it, and it just seems to be escalating. And nobody wants to talk about it. You sound like, I mean, there's just, I can hear myself. I sound a little nutty saying this. People who aren't believers, they don't see this stuff. But I'm telling you, there is something wrong with the spirit in the country right now. There is something really happening in the country right now, and it is profoundly affecting society. And you know it when you see it. You can feel that there's something wrong. The tension even within churches right now over how to proceed and what to do. The people within churches, the good, committed Christians who people know and admire, are now being attacked because they're insufficiently against wokeism, as opposed to being insufficiently for the gospel. They're fully for the gospel, but they're not fully denouncing wokeism like people think. We've got these levels of purity tests right now within and without churches. We've got this level of purity in society now, and you're either for the police or you're for the other side. There's no nuance allowed. In fact, even the suggestion of nuance is liberalism these days.
30.
The devil is dividing everybody. It's the most amazing thing to see. There is truly spiritual warfare happening in the country, and it's happening as fewer and fewer Americans are going to church and more Americans are declaring themselves unbelievers. It's not a coincidence that this is happening. Prayer is one of the big things that people need to be doing, and nobody does that these days. Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here, the Erick Erickson Show across America now. Glad to have you with me. We're gonna have to pour one out for the Democrats, I suppose. They don't really know what to do. Friends, the Biden agenda is dead or dying. And the Democrats are beside themselves, livid with Joe Manchin because of it. The Politico has a headline, Poor Chuck. Schumer confronts mid-year mess. Schumer ally Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat of Rhode Island, puts it, poor Chuck. He's got the weight of the world on him. The majority leader has hugely consequential issues bearing down on him, such as climate change, Whitehouse said in an interview, and he has no margin to work with and an implacable and amoral opponent in Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. There's nobody that I can think of who could do it better than he does. McConnell could. All right. It's analysis time, kids. The Democrats have a 50-50 Senate. The filibuster requires a 60-vote threshold. Joe Manchin says he's not going to get rid of the filibuster. He's not even going to reform it. There is a full court press on by members of the press, not just Democrats, members of the press, to lower the threshold to 55. That's not going to happen. Manchin's not going to do it. So the Democrats can't get anything done. Infrastructure is going to have to be bipartisan. There are backroom deals being made by Republican and Democrats in the Senate. They've got the outline and framework of a deal. They just don't have an actual deal to show for it. The pay equity legislation is dead. H.R. 1S1, the voting rights bill is dead. The John Lewis voting rights bill is dead. Filibuster reform is dead. The Democratic agenda cannot get done. And on top of that, there is a crime wave in the nation that is hurting the Democrats. It is impacting how the Democrats are proceeding, and it's making it impossible for them to get anything done. So, for example, the Democrats in Washington, D.C. very much want to prohibit some of the Republican election reform measures at the state level. They want to, for example, require that there be no more gerrymandering, that bipartisan or nonpartisan commissions draw the lines to protect the House Democrats. They think it would help them. It really wouldn't. All the data shows that if you drew nonpartisan lines, it would still benefit Republicans because most states, rural states in particular, you're able to draw lines more conveniently for the Republicans. And in California and Maryland and Illinois, you would have to draw seats that benefit Republicans, where Democrats are engaged in gerrymandering without the media willing to acknowledge it. Likewise, you have a problem with the crime issue. The Republicans are able to make hay out of this issue because prominent Democratic voices are still out there saying that the governments need to defund the police. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the squad, the so-called squad, continue to push defund the police language. It's not helpful for Democrats around the country as the crime wave goes up. Joe Biden is president and the Democrats are in charge of Congress, so they get the blame. The Republicans don't have to work with them. Republicans get credit from their base by obstructing it, and voters don't blame them for obstruction because they're thinking the Democrats can do everything. Well, why can't Joe Biden just do executive orders? Well, he really can, and the public doesn't understand that. There's not a nuanced conversation in that regard. So now infrastructure is going to require that the Democrats have a bipartisan deal with the GOP, but that infrastructure negotiation and deal that they're going to have with the GOP will abandon parts of the Green New Deal, while the Democrats have tried to create a fierce urgency of now on the part of the public to deal with it. Here's the problem for the Democrats. more and more voters now recognize that climate change is an issue. Whether you or I do, a majority of Americans now believe climate change is a problem. And they want the government to do something about climate change. But concurrent to that, when you poll Americans about the individual solutions to climate change, they're pretty much opposed to all of the Democrats' preferred policies. So, for example, forcing people to give up gas-guzzling cars. The public supports it, except their car. They don't want to give up their car. Having the government fund battery infrastructure around the country. The public supports it until they're told their taxes would go up to support it. Having buildings shut down and renovated through the Green New Deal, the public doesn't actually like that, nor do they want it with their homes. In swing states, they're heavy coal infrastructure and carbon infrastructure, and those people don't want to give up their jobs for the Green New Deal. Having taxes go up, the public's opposed to it. Getting rid of cows, the public's opposed to it. Forcing people to become vegetarians or eat those synthetic processed hemoglobin fake meat substitutes, the public's opposed to it. Having power rate increases, the public's opposed to it. And then there's a recognition on the part of the public that China, India, Brazil, Russia, some of these third and second world countries that are fast growing, they're more to blame than us. And the public doesn't seem to understand why we must give up our way of life when we're really not the culprit anymore. It's those countries. Why are we always to blame when really it's those countries? And Americans understand that. So the Democrats have very, very difficult needles to thread when the public kind of gets the parameters. The public supports them overall on an issue, but in general, but the more they learn about it, they don't. And then the Democrats themselves are suffering from a fundamental problem I want to spend a little more time with later, but you need to understand right now. The Democrats now have a rise of polling firms that are given credibility by the media, but themselves aren't really credible. So, for example, there is a data group, Data Progress is a left-wing polling firm that shows 75% of Republican voters in West Virginia support the Democrats' voting rights bill. Do you really believe that's the truth? Do you really believe that 75% of Republicans support a Democratic voting measure in the United States House of Representatives that even most Democrats don't even understand? If you think that's true, I've got a bridge to sell you. It's not true, and yet the Democrats are being taken over by grifters pushing polls that tell them what they want to hear, and the New York Times is advancing those polls as if they're legitimate. Very much like back in the day, you had PPP, the Democratic polling firm, would produce all of these polls showing overwhelming public support for gay marriage, and then you would go to the polls and gay marriage would always lose. The Democrats believed the polls and then delegitimize the actual electoral results because it conflicted with the polling. It's something Republicans have done to some degree, but the Democrats are now escalating it, and they can't get their agenda done. There's no willingness to acknowledge that reality in polling deviates. I myself, it took me a long time to get to the point of thinking we really can't trust the polls anymore, but where the polls and our intuition align, we probably should. The problem is that Democrats now live in more of a bubble than Republicans. I and you are more likely to encounter someone on the other side of the aisle than they are us. Democrats are more likely to live in bubbles. Democrats are more likely to live in Democratic enclaves. Democrats are more likely to affirm their worldview by a left-leaning press. They are never challenged on their thoughts and their policies. They're never challenged on what they believe is true. They're never challenged by the media because the media is in the bubble with them. And the result is that they are losing touch with the American public. They are losing touch with American values, and they are losing touch with public policy positions that sell. But at the same time, they're in charge of Washington, D.C. So they're in charge of the Senate, they're in charge of the House, they're in charge of the White House, they're in charge of the bureaucracy, and they can't get anything done. And so they have become deeply, deeply frustrated. But their frustration is manifesting itself in ways that will frustrate them further. They are more frustrated with internal Democrats than they are the Republicans right now. So, for example, Democrats are turning on Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin, two Democrats who, if they were defeated tomorrow, or if they died tomorrow, their Republican governors would pick Republican replacements, and the Republicans would take back the Senate. If they were defeated tomorrow, the Republicans would more likely than not win and take back the Senate. If Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema converted to the GOP, Mitch McConnell would become the majority leader. The Democrats don't have a lot of options. It is the middle of June, 2021. In October, the new fiscal year will start. And the Democrats will start focusing on next year's midterms. The result is going to be deep dissatisfaction and frustration within the Democratic Party towards Democrats who have blocked Joe Biden's initiatives. It'll be a deeper frustration for Democrats against Democrats than Republicans because it's the Democrats who control the Senate. They've convinced themselves, by faith, they've convinced themselves that the filibuster is worth getting rid of. They're not paying attention to the long game. They're paying attention to the short game. Meanwhile, you've got Joe Manchin saying it would destroy the Senate. I'm not going to do it. He's a Democrat. They want to beat him as a result of it. They can't beat him. He's not up for re-election, which means they can't do anything. The level of frustration that's setting in on the Democratic Party right now doesn't end well for the Democrats. It will spark a Democratic civil war because it's the Democrats obstructing the Democrats. The Republicans can't obstruct. It's Joe Manchin who could help them get rid of the filibuster, and he's not going to do it. And even if they were to lower the threshold to 55, Mitch McConnell has got the Republicans towing a line. They still wouldn't be able to get this stuff through. No Republican supports the Voting Rights Act that the Democrats have passed. They're out of options, and they're running out of time. About the only thing Joe Biden can do is bold foreign policy initiatives that he doesn't need Congress to be a part of. And even he's having trouble getting that done because some of his allies are still deeply skeptical of this country because they know, Donald Trump could come back in a couple of years. So why bother negotiating with Joe Biden?
Eden Pure.
Folks, I keep telling you about the Eden Pure Thunderstorm. It's a filterless air purifier, and I really hope you'll consider getting one. You can hold this